Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the funeral service for Mrs. Aviva Rubin. Officiating today is Rabbi Andrea London.
I'm Rabbi Andrea London of Beth Emet Synagogue in Evanston. We gather together to mourn the loss of Aviva Rubin, and I think for all of us who are in this Zoom room together, we remember being together just a week ago as we mourned Harvey's loss. 64 years of Eva and Harvey were partners in life, and now the tragedy of COVID has taken both of our beloveds. Oh God, we thank you for the 91 years of Aviva's life, for her intelligence, for her energy, for her commitment to social justice, as we now mourn her loss today. Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu, ben enosh v'techashvehu. Adam lahavel damai, yamin ketzel over, baboker atzitz v'chalaf, le'erev yomolel v'yavesh. O eternal God, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up, renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to return to dust, saying, Return, O mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity you are God. As for us, you turn to us to repentance and say, Return, you mortals. The days of our years are 70, or by reason of strength 80 years. But 1,000 years in God's sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Teach us, therefore, to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. And may your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. לידה היא ראשית ופטירה תכלית. החיים כמסעים, כהלכה כצמיחה משלב לשלב. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray, to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. לידה היא ראשית ופטירה תכלית. החיים כמסעים, עלייה קדושה, שלב אחר שלב, מלידה לפטירה, לחיי עולם הבא. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death, to life everlasting. And now we take these precious moments together to speak about the sacred pilgrimage that was Aviva Rubin's life. I would like to invite Aviva's eldest grandchild, Julia, to speak.
Thank you. During the last few weeks, a thing I've been told and reflected on is how lucky I was to have known my grandparents as an adult. I know this is true, but I also know that from such a young age, my grandma Aviva and I shared so much. My grandma was a words person. As my mom explained at my grandpa Harvey's Shiva, my grandparents gave me and my brother Ben so many great books, and were always eager to discuss them with us after we were done reading. My grandma took delight in her grandchildren, me and Ben, and a few years later, Aaliyah, loving to do something she too held dear. This continued as I got older, and we would often talk about this New Yorker article or that New York Times piece, and of course, whatever book we were each working our way through. She wasn't just a words person for fun, though. She was an editor, someone who made words her job. I followed in her footsteps, and she always kept up with the stories I wrote and edited, starting with my high school newspaper and continuing throughout my decade-long career in journalism in New York, where she too had lived. When she and my grandpa moved out of their condo in Evanston, she gave me free rein to take whatever books I wanted from her formidable shelves. I went straight for the vintage titles like Writing Down the Bones and The Chicago Guide to Preparing Electronic Manuscripts. They sit proudly on my shelves now. Speaking of electronic manuscripts, my grandma was the first person I knew with a computer. When I would visit her and my grandpa on special trips without my parents or brother, she would show me how to do the Times crossword on the desktop, which felt like the future. She was also one of the first people I knew with email, and I loved writing her at her Northwestern address. We went many places together, including the fabric store. She made me cute outfits with such love, including a suit in maroon corduroy and a skirt with purple and blue flowers. She taught me how to knit, and I made a rainbow scarf from yarn that she took me to pick out. It made me think of her during all the winters I wore it. She herself had great taste. I thought of her as my cosmopolitan, city-living grandma with her mid-century furniture and stylish jewelry collection. She loved art, as did my grandpa, and they nurtured my own interest in museums and the art world. We spent countless hours at the Art Institute when I visited Chicago and the St. Louis Art Museum when they would visit my family. We would go to the Field Museum too, and the Museum of Science and Industry, and the Missouri Historical Society, and the St. Louis Science Center, any museum really. We went to all the best ones in London during my very first trip abroad when I was 10. It was a trip that changed the way I saw the world, a trip that showed me the world, and introduced me both to the dubiously procured Elgin marbles and the deliciousness of Indian food. Her travels with my grandpa were incredibly inspiring to me. I always loved looking through photos from their latest adventure, and they made sure to bring me back some coins from wherever they had been, building me an impressive collection. While my own parents liked to stay closer to home, I got the travel bug from my grandparents. When I started to travel the world myself, going to the places they had gone together, Argentina, Portugal, China, my grandma and I would debrief about all I had seen and what she remembered from her own trips to wherever I just returned from. There are so many places they've been that I hope to still visit. I will miss my grandma Aviva very much, and am so grateful for all of the things that brought her joy that bring me joy too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And now Mimi, Aviva's daughter, will speak on behalf of her brother and sister, David and Rachel.
Thank you everyone for being here today. It means so much to Rachel, David, and myself. Our mom was a very complicated woman. She was many things. She was brilliant, independent, meticulous, organized, serious, strict, and she loved to laugh. She couldn't tell a joke if her life depended on it, but that was okay, because that was our dad's department. She was a feminist and fiercely supported many causes and passions. In 1966, she was in Marquette Park when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was met with violent protesters and tear gas. In 1968, she marched in downtown Chicago, which turned into a riot during the Democratic Convention. She supported and campaigned for the passing of the Equal Rights Amendment, abortion rights, and many, many political campaigns. My sister, brother, and I remember many days and evenings in campaign offices and living rooms, collating and stuffing envelopes for for candidates such as George McGovern, Abner Mikva, and of course, our Uncle Bob when he ran for alderman in Evanston. Mom loved to throw a party. She was an amazing cook, and she filled the house with candles and taught me that lighting is everything. She also made lists for everything, especially when she entertained. She would write down what she served and who the guests were. Then, when the next dinner party or large gathering occurred, she would review her list so as not to repeat a menu for the same guests. She loved her friends. Our parents had many, many close friendships. And in addition, our mom loved all our friends, always encouraging us to have them over for dinner and join in our family events. Mom was not an outdoorsy person. She didn't understand why someone would go on a hike or take a walk in the woods. She was a bit of a klutz, which unfortunately I inherited that trait. She was a city person. She thrived on being immersed in large cities and hitting every museum and shopping boutique she could find. When our parents sold their house in Evanston to downsize, Mom really wanted to move back to the city, ideally to Lincoln Park. Dad vetoed that idea, though. He was content to be in Evanston, where life was a little calmer. And as you know, as we've all said between my father and my mom's recollections, that travel was a huge part of our parents' lives once we kids were out of the house. Despite Mom being a very cautious person in her day-to-day life, she was actually pretty adventurous when it came to traveling. She loved to research her next trip and encouraged our dad to go to faraway places such as India and China, or rent a house in Italy for several weeks. But don't be fooled. She was a big fan of luxury hotels and fine dining as well. At home in Chicago and then in Evanston, Mom loved to take us kids to the beach, lay in the sun, and spend a weekend lounging by Tasha and Bill's swimming pool. Those pool days always ended with gin and tonics in the yard. We loved so much that our dad one year designed t-shirts for the pool G&T group of a hand holding a cocktail with a lime wedge emerging from the water. Despite her being so organized, Mom was not the best housekeeper, which frustrated our dad. Her sewing room overflowed with fabric and yarn, and her side of the bed was surrounded with stacks of magazines. She subscribed to Ms. Magazine from the very first issue and kept them all to reread years later. She had a great sense of style and subscribed to Vogue magazine as well, as she was always following fashion trends, which is a trait that her granddaughter Julia passionately inherited. She loved jewelry, and our father loved to indulge her by finding new pieces for her collection, often purchased at museums, stores, and on their travels. She was not afraid of color, another thing I also inherited. I think she would have loved my kitchen cabinets, which were recently painted orange. Classical music and NPR were always on in our house. Mom loved mid-century modern furniture, as Julia acknowledged, and Art Deco and Art Nouveau decorative items. She was a bit snobbish about her eye for design. Actually, she was a bit snobbish about a lot of things. She had very high standards, which could be challenging as a child of this type of parent. She believed that if you didn't do something right the first time, you wouldn't make a mistake. That's probably why she loved being an editor. That red pencil correcting other people's errors was very satisfying to her. David remembers her being the mean mom during on-school field trips, always yelling at him and his friends to stop goofing off. Now I'm going to segue to sentiments from Rachel, as her words eloquently describe Mom's influence on her and their relationship. So these are Rachel's words. She instilled in me my commitment to social justice. I went to civil rights and anti-war demonstrations with her in the 1960s as a child. We boycotted grapes and then lettuce in support of the United Farm Workers struggle. I remember going to the Fullerton Avenue beach in the summer and being jealous seeing other kids eating grapes and having Mom explain why we weren't eating any for our beach picnic lunch. She fought against urban renewal, gentrification, in our Lakeview neighborhood that was forcing out Puerto Rican working class families. She helped found the Lakeview Citizens Council to fight the racism and discrimination in our elementary school, where the poor kids and kids of color were trapped into lower performing classrooms with the least skilled teachers. She testified at city council meetings against the daily machine, and Rachel subbed for her once when she was sick. These and other activities and her unwavering support for my, Rachel, activist work throughout my life are a legacy I will always honor. Continuing with Rachel. Mom was so smart. I think if the world had been different for women of her generation, she would have gone to medical school or completed her PhD in speech pathology. She was a feminist and taught her daughters and son to stand up for themselves and not be subservient to anyone. She had a true partnership with our dad, and he appreciated her intellect and commitment to her political work. The relationship could be tempestuous, but they always maintained a respect for each other's opinions. Mom and Dad shared their love of theater, movies, museums, and the cultural richness of life. They did best when traveling, seeing the sights of Europe, Asia, and Latin America, and seeing theater in Stratford in Canada every summer for well over 30 years. Mom developed rheumatoid arthritis in her early 30s and was frequently in pain, but she never complained, and she didn't want to ask for help lifting a heavy tray off a high shelf. Her strength to deal with her pain for so many decades was amazing and a strong testament to her character and her will. She loved her children and her grandchildren without measure. She tried to teach us how to knit, sew, crochet, and cook with varying success. She was a master of all these crafts as well as a math whiz and a great editor, a voracious reader into her 80s until her eyesight began to fail her 2 to 3 years ago. She was in the same book club for over 40 years. She enjoyed bridge, but she was no athlete. She couldn't pass PE in college, so she had to petition her dean to have the class forgiven so she could receive her diploma, graduating magna cum laude. Now, just back to my conclusion is that over the past few days, reflecting on our mom's life, it's interesting how much the three of us held her in such high regard, remembering her as a fascinating person, not just as our mother. She will be missed by many, and we will always remember her loud voice and big personality and such a petite human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi, for those amazing reflections. And you know, when I think about your mother, I think about her being a very colorful person. Her clothes and her jewelry always did make quite a presence when she would come to synagogue. And of course, for your mother, being Jewish was an important part of her life, having grown up with a father who was a rabbi. But most importantly, as you have reflected, she had a very deep social conscience, which she got from her Judaism, and was involved in so many different causes you so beautifully talked about. But she was born in Jerusalem. And so that Jewish connection back to Israel is really powerful and important to her. And she was always really proud of that. She happened to be staying there with her mother because her father was still getting his citizenship. And so her mother went as she was pregnant to Israel. And then Aviva was born there. And then they came back after her father had received his citizenship, so that her mother, Rebecca, and then Aviva later became citizens as well. Growing up in the Midwest in Missouri and Iowa, her father moved between various synagogue congregations during his rabbinical career. Aviva graduated from high school at 16 years old. You've already spoken about how intelligent she was, one of the youngest people to attend the University of Iowa. After college, she lived in New York, pursuing her graduate studies in speech pathology. And that was her first career, was in speech pathology. But then she had a second career of 15 years raising her children with family dinners every night and the chore charts with the stars. And then she pursued her third career at Northwestern as an editor at University Publications. And we heard about how much she enjoyed that job of editing and that red pencil. As David reflected to me, he said he gave her a paper once in high school to look at and never again because it came back with so many red marks. Aviva also had beautiful penmanship, despite the fact that she was left-handed, and had won an award for how beautifully she wrote. We've heard about what an amazing cook she was, and so incredible with her hands as knitting and sewing and making sweaters and needle pointing and travel. Really was a Renaissance woman in her own right. And she was a loving mother, but even as David and Rachel and Mimi said, that she really came alive when she had those grandchildren, Julia, Ben, and Aaliyah, very affectionate with all three of them and would light up when she would talk about them. She shared an amazing partnership with Harvey for 64 years. They met when ushering at a community theater, and their love of theaters, movies, politics, and a social life carried them throughout their 64-year partnership, being part of a film group and the Jewish Catholic dialogue group, among many other things they did, including all of their various travels, as we've heard about. And Harvey was very supportive of Aviva working outside the home. Harvey picked up the chore of grocery shopping so that they could split the chores up around home. And as we heard, Aviva was an early feminist and instilled that in her children, the importance of equality between men and women being out there in the world. This week in the Jewish tradition, we start to read the book of Exodus, the very first chapters. And as we say goodbye to Aviva, this particular book in Torah is fitting to say goodbye to her with, because the book of Exodus is a paradigmatic tale of liberation and the fight for justice and freedom. And this is what Aviva spent so much of her life doing in her political causes, and instilled those values in her children and in her grandchildren. And so as we say goodbye to her today, we say, Zichronah livracha, may her memory be for a blessing as we continue to take up the causes that she was concerned with and to live by the values that she instilled in each and every one of us, and to remember her colorful clothing and colorful spirit. May that bring joy to us and a smile to our lips as we remember her on this day. Oh God, we pray that she will rest in peace, that she and her beloved Harvey will be together, and that we will remember both of them extremely fondly and with love. Amen. O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we return to you, the source of life and the answer to all its mysteries. We now take a moment to offer in our hearts a silent prayer for Aviva and for her family. As we are able, we rise together for El Moled Rachamim, the memorial prayer. אל מלא רחמים שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה. עם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר כי הם מסירים את נשמת אביבה בת רב שלום ורבקה שלחה לעולמה. בעל הרחמים יסירה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ותרור בתורה החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Aviva Epstein Rubin, daughter of Shalom and Rebecca, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
This concludes the funeral service today. The family will be having a Zoom shiva tomorrow evening from 6 to 8 p.m. That information is on our website, ChicagoJewishFunerals.com.